Have you ever driven a lonely road at night, with only your headlights piercing the darkness, and felt eyes watching you from the shadows? Welcome to Dark Fears. Tonight's video is 7 most disturbing true Oregon trucker horror stories. Real accounts from truckers who face the unknown on Oregon's remote highways. Every story you'll hear tonight is based on true events, though names and exact locations have been changed for privacy. Before we dive into the darkness, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you never miss a chilling story. Tonight, you'll hear tales from those who drove the loneliest roads at night and lived to tell the tale. Our first story begins on a foggy stretch of highway where one trucker discovered not every passenger is human. I'd been driving north on Oregon Route 138 for hours. The fog was thick, rolling in like a gray tide, swallowing the headlights of my 18-wheeler. The highway stretched endlessly, surrounded by dense pine forests that seemed alive with whispers I couldn't quite hear. My cab was warm, the hum of the engine and the tires on wet asphalt the only sounds. Until I saw her. A girl stood at the shoulder, her thumb out. Pale skin, dark hair plastered to her face, shivering as though the cold seeped through more than just her clothes. Something about her made my chest tighten. I'd been driving trucks for over a decade, seen every type of hitchhiker. But something here wasn't right. She didn't speak when I rolled down the window, just looked at me with eyes so dark they seemed almost empty. I told myself to be rational. Pick her up. It's a long stretch of road. She could freeze out here. As she climbed in, the fog seemed to curl around the cab, heavier now, as though the world outside had vanished. The radio crackled faintly, static whispering over the low hum of the engine. My heart sank, though I didn't know why. She didn't speak a word. I tried asking questions, casual small talk, but only silence returned. I stole glances at her. Her eyes were fixed on some point beyond the windshield, as if she could see things I couldn't. Every mile, my unease grew. The fog thickened, pressing against the truck like a living wall. I tapped the brakes lightly, trying to shake off the growing tension. A sudden tapping came from the back of the cab. My stomach tightened. I spun my head. Nothing. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The girl turned slightly, just enough for me to notice her lips moving. But no sound came. I blinked. She stared straight through me, an expression that sent shivers down my spine. It felt as if the fog outside had bled into the cab, wrapping around her, making her almost unreal. I forced myself to focus on the road. Miles passed, but the feeling that something wasn't right never left. Every shadow, every sound seemed amplified, echoing in ways I couldn't explain. The fog made the road feel like a tunnel to nowhere. Shapes flickered at the edges of my vision, trees that seemed to bend, shadows that moved when I wasn't looking directly. My mind tried to rationalize it. Sleep deprivation, long hours. But something in the air made rational thoughts impossible. I glimpsed movement behind the girl's seat. A flash of pale skin, a shadow that shouldn't have been there. My heart raced. I tried to focus on driving, but the tapping returned. Soft, rhythmic, echoing in the cab. I spun again. Empty. She shifted just a fraction, and this time I noticed her hands, unnaturally still, rigid. I swallowed hard. The radio buzzed. A voice whispered something in a language I didn't recognize. My pulse thumped so loud, I was sure she could hear it. The road twisted sharply, headlights illuminating only fog and wet asphalt. I dared not ask her who she was, what she wanted. My gut screamed that any question might break the fragile line between reality and whatever this was. A mile marker passed, then another. My stomach sank when I realized I hadn't seen her hands or face for a few seconds. I glanced again, she was gone. Panic rose instantly. I slammed the brakes, scanning the seat. Nothing. The seatbelt hung loose, untouched. I leapt out, flashlight in hand, fog swallowing the beam. The asphalt stretched empty. No footprints, no girl, just the faint echo of the engine. I thought I might be losing my mind. I climbed back into the cab, shaking. Then she was there again, sitting silently, staring straight ahead as if nothing had happened. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. My hands shook on the wheel. The world outside seemed heavier, darker, as if the fog itself had gained weight. I told myself to focus, drive, ignore it. But the tapping on the cab returned. Softer now, almost gentle, like fingers grazing metal. I dared not look. My rational mind was failing me. As I drove again, the road seemed alive. Shadows moved along the trees, twisting, stretching. My headlights bounced off shapes that vanished when I tried to focus. Every mile added weight to the tension. My hands gripped the wheel, knuckles aching. The girl's eyes followed some unseen entity in the fog. Her lips whispered again, silent to my ears, and a chill ran down my spine. The tapping continued, faint but persistent, now coming from both the cab and the trailer behind me. I dared not look back in the mirrors. I pressed on. Every turn revealed fog thicker than before. The forest seemed to lean in, dark boughs like fingers reaching for the cab. My breath fogged the windows. I wanted to scream, but my voice refused to form. Suddenly, a shadow crossed the road. Long, thin, impossible. I swerved slightly, heart pounding. The truck shook, tires squealing. I slammed the brakes, frozen with fear. When I looked again, nothing remained, except the girl staring straight ahead as if nothing had happened. I finally reached a deserted toll booth, the kind that hadn't been staffed in years. I pulled in, hoping to escape the tension. I breathed heavily, scanning the cab. The girl was still there, silent, hollow-eyed. I stepped out to stretch, and that's when I saw her shadow outside. A reflection in the toll booth glass. She was standing on the roof of the truck, impossible, just watching. My heart stopped. I spun around, but there was nothing. Fog swallowed everything. The engine roared as I jumped back in. My hands trembled on the wheel. I tried talking to her. Nothing. She simply stared. The air grew colder, heavier like frost creeping through the cab. My mind was screaming at me to stop, to abandon the truck, but where would I go? The highway stretched endlessly behind me. I floored the accelerator. Every mile forward felt like moving deeper into a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The fog became thicker, swirling around the cab like smoke. I heard whispers now. Soft voices that seemed to echo from the tires, the mirrors, even inside my head. The girl's lips moved rapidly, silent yet urgent. I couldn't focus on the road anymore. A shadow emerged in front of the truck, humanoid, but elongated, twisting unnaturally. I swerved violently, narrowly avoiding hitting it. My heart pounded in my ears. When I looked back, it was gone. But the tapping returned, now inside the cab, echoing from every corner. Every instinct told me to stop, but the truck refused to slow. It was like the highway itself had taken control. The girl leaned slightly toward me, and for the first time, I felt a cold, otherworldly pressure against my shoulder, like frost creeping under my skin. I realized I was trapped in some in-between, where reality and nightmare blurred. My eyes darted everywhere, searching for answers that didn't exist. I entered a long, narrow tunnel, the fog oddly concentrated inside. The truck's lights barely penetrated the darkness. I could hear tapping all around me, echoing off the walls. My pulse thundered. The girl's face appeared in the rearview mirror, pale and blank, lips moving in silence. I realized I couldn't see the end of the tunnel. Every inch forward felt like a mile. Shadows danced on the walls, forming impossible shapes, long limbs, twisted faces, fleeting glimpses that disappeared when I blinked. I tried shouting, screaming, but my voice was muffled by the fog, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. Every sense screamed danger. I pressed on, forced to drive into a nightmare with no exit. The fog finally began to thin as I exited the tunnel. Relief washed over me, but the tension didn't fade. The girl was gone again. I scanned the cab, every shadow, every corner, nothing. I reached the edge of the forest. Normal streetlights flickered ahead. The world felt real again, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The highway was empty. I dared a glance in the rearview mirror. There she was, standing silently on the roadside, eyes hollow, waiting. I slammed the accelerator and didn't stop until I reached the next rest area. The cab felt heavy, like I was carrying the fog inside with me. Even now, when the highway fog rises, I think of her. I can't forget the tapping, the whispers, the hollow stare of the hitchhiker who should not exist. I parked at a crowded rest area, finally breathing. Drivers laughed and chatted. The normalcy felt surreal. I checked the cab one last time, empty. No sign of her ever being there. But sometimes, when I drive these roads, I see her in the fog again. Waiting, silent, watching. I call her the fog passenger, a ghost hitchhiker who never reaches her destination. I warn anyone driving alone on Oregon highways at night. If the fog thickens and you see a pale girl at the roadside, don't pick her up. Not everything that looks human wants to go home. It was a late November evening, cold enough that my breath fogged the cab windows despite the heater blasting full. I was hauling a refrigerated load on Oregon Route 22, a stretch of road notorious for its sharp turns and steep overpasses. The fading daylight cast long shadows from the forest, lining the highway, twisting trees into grotesque shapes as if reaching for the asphalt. I had been on the road for nearly 12 hours, caffeine doing little to keep my eyes fully open. The radio played faint static, interrupted occasionally by distant news snippets about accidents that happened on these same roads. A shiver ran down my spine. I'd heard the stories. Drivers spoke of strange figures standing on overpasses, leaping, disappearing, leaving no trace. My headlights caught movement ahead. At first, I thought it was a deer, but then I saw it. A figure standing on the metal guard of an overpass, impossibly still. A tall, thin shadow with no distinct features, not moving despite the wind howling through the canyon. My pulse quickened. I slowed the truck to a crawl, gripping the wheel tight. There was something unnervingly wrong about the way it stood, frozen yet aware, like it was waiting for something or someone. I told myself it was fatigue, imagination, or a trick of light. But deep down, I knew I was staring at something far more sinister. I pressed on slowly, trying to ignore the figure. My mind raced, telling me it was just a pedestrian, a daredevil, or some kind of optical illusion. Yet every instinct screamed danger. I noticed details that made my stomach knot. The shadow's head was slightly tilted, almost too perfectly aligned with my headlights, and its body seemed unnaturally rigid, like a mannequin. A gust of wind slammed against the cab, rattling the trailer doors. I glanced up at the overpass again. The shadow didn't move an inch, but I could swear it was now leaning forward slightly, as if tracking me. My heart pounded, and a cold sweat broke across my back. The road curved sharply under the overpass. I slowed even further. A strange sound reached me, almost like scraping metal, but too soft to be the guardrail. My peripheral vision caught something flicker atop the overpass. I slammed the brakes briefly and looked up, flashlight beam from my phone cutting through the darkness. Nothing. Just the shadow, impossibly still, now slightly further along the railing. My hands trembled. I gripped the wheel, telling myself it's probably a homeless person, someone hiding or playing a prank. But the absolute stillness, the sheer unnatural posture, felt wrong. As I passed directly under the overpass, I caught a glimpse of its face. Or rather, what should have been a face. It was featureless, smooth, pale, almost like a mask. My stomach churned. The overpass suddenly seemed narrower, the shadow larger, stretching impossibly over the metal guard. I felt a pressure in my chest, like the air had thickened. Every sound became exaggerated. The truck's engine, the tires squealing slightly on wet asphalt, my own shallow breathing. The shadow shifted. Just a fraction, but enough. My pulse skyrocketed. I instinctively glanced at the mirrors. Nothing behind me, yet the sense of being followed intensified. The shadow seemed to cling to the overpass, moving in perfect unison with my truck. My rational brain tried to explain it. Optical illusion, fog, fatigue, but my gut knew better. I kept driving, heart hammering, eyes glued to the overpass. With every second, it felt like the figure was preparing to descend, watching, waiting for me to falter. The headlights illuminated mist curling from the canyon below, and the shadow became more distinct, unnaturally thin, limbs slightly elongated, its stance impossibly balanced on the narrow railing. Half a mile past the overpass, my stomach twisted. I glanced at the side mirror and saw movement behind me. A fleeting figure crouched on the road shoulder. I slammed the brakes, heart racing. The truck shuddered, tires squealing against asphalt. I leaned forward, squinting. Nothing. Just fog and trees swaying in the wind. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling it had been there, tall, thin, faceless. My hands shook on the wheel. Every mile I drove, the sensation of being watched didn't fade. It grew heavier, pressing against my skin like icy fingers. The radio crackled. Static, then a faint whisper, a voice that seemed to echo from inside the trailer. I froze. It wasn't in any language I recognized, just guttural syllables that made the hairs on my neck stand. My instincts screamed to stop. But the road behind me now felt like a trap. The forest seemed alive, shadows twisting unnaturally at the edges of my headlights. Every reflection in the mirrors became distorted, almost humanoid. I swallowed hard, pressing my foot to the accelerator. Every mile forward was an escape, yet the pressure in my chest intensified, a suffocating presence lurking just out of sight. The fog thickened around me, curling into the cab through every crack and vent. My eyes darted to the mirrors again. There it was. A fleeting figure crouched low, moving impossibly fast along the shoulder. My hands clenched the wheel so tight I could feel my knuckles cracking. The highway twisted sharply ahead, and every curve seemed to stretch, elongate, like some cruel trick of the night. The shadow followed. Always at the edge of visibility, always just beyond comprehension. I tried to shake it, pressing the accelerator, but the asphalt seemed sticky, slowing me down. A tapping sound began inside the cab, soft, rhythmic, like fingernails on metal. I spun in my seat, Nothing. The shadow didn't enter the cab, yet I felt its gaze pierce my mind. It was waiting for me to falter. I told myself to focus, to rationalize. Maybe it was someone in the fog, a prankster. But the sheer impossibility of its movements, the featureless face, and the cold that seemed to seep into my bones told me otherwise. My pulse thundered. Ahead, a dim overpass loomed. My headlights revealed the shadow perched atop it, limbs impossibly elongated, bending in ways human anatomy should forbid. It didn't move as I passed. It glided, a silent predator tracking me. The cab felt heavy, the fog pressing down, suffocating. Sweat ran down my temples as I crested a small hill. The fog ahead seemed thicker than reality should allow. Shapes swirled at the edges of my vision, twisted, shadowy forms that mirrored the figure from the overpass. I blinked, gone. But I could still feel it, tracking me relentlessly. I glanced at the mirrors again. One of the shadows appeared to hover behind the trailer, elongated limbs scraping the wet asphalt. My breath hitched. I forced my eyes back on the road, every fiber of my being screaming at me to stop, to escape, but I had no idea how. The tapping returned, louder, echoing inside the cab. I could swear I heard whispers this time. Guttural, low, like wind passing through hollow bones. I tried rolling the window up, but the fog seeped inside, cold and damp. Ahead, the headlights caught something impossible. The shadow seemed to detach from the overpass above, floating, moving toward me. My stomach twisted. Panic made my foot heavy on the accelerator. The cab rattled, tires squealing, engine groaning under strain. I told myself repeatedly, it's not real. But the figure's perfect stillness, its eerie synchronization with my truck, and the fog pressing into my chest made it impossible to believe. Somewhere between adrenaline and terror, I realized I was being hunted. The overpass ahead loomed like a dark, steel monster. My headlights illuminated the shadow again, perched impossibly high, featureless face staring straight at me. I could feel its gaze, or rather, the absence of it, a hollow, cold nothing that seeped into my chest. Suddenly, a gust of wind slammed into the cab. The tapping turned into a pounding on the roof, synchronized with the screech of the tires. I swerved violently. In the mirrors, I glimpsed it descending the overpass railing, moving faster than any human could. Limbs bent unnaturally, shadow stretching with the fog itself. Panic consumed me. I shouted, my voice swallowed by the fog. The cab felt alive, shaking, vibrating under some unseen force. The trailer doors rattled violently, and I saw flashes of pale limbs against the fog. My heart pounded like a drum in my ears. I floorboarded the accelerator, tires struggling for traction on wet asphalt. The shadow seemed to anticipate every turn, gliding, tilting, following. I realized that escape might be impossible. The fog itself was an accomplice. Then, as I reached the next curve, I caught a glimpse of its face in the side mirror. Featureless, smooth, horrifyingly human in size, but impossible in motion. It tilted its head slightly, as if mocking my fear. I dared not blink. I spotted a rest area ahead, dim lights flickering. Hope surged. I veered off the highway, heart hammering, fog pressing against the cab like icy hands. The shadow followed the road like liquid darkness, gliding across the asphalt. I slammed the brakes briefly to gauge its reaction. It didn't falter. Not once. Its featureless face tilted again, and I could swear the fog swirled around it intentionally, forming shapes like clawed hands reaching for me. My chest burned with panic. I floored it toward the rest area, skidding slightly on the wet pavement. The shadow paused at the edge of the highway, tilting its head, watching. Then it began to fade, dissolving into the fog like smoke, leaving only an icy chill behind. I didn't stop to look back. I parked among other trucks, shaking, soaked in sweat and cold. Drivers glanced at me strangely as I scrambled out. I told myself it was over, that I had escaped. But deep down, I knew it had only let me go. For now, inside the rest area, the normalcy felt jarring. Drivers chatted. The lights flickered softly. I checked the trailer, every mirror, the cab interior, empty. Yet the pressure in my chest didn't fade. I felt eyes on me, even in the bright interior. Every reflective surface hinted at movement. I glimpsed a figure in a puddle outside. Just a shadow, featureless, impossible. My hands trembled, fingers clutching the steering wheel, even when parked. Sleep was impossible. Coffee did nothing to chase away the creeping fear. I realized I could never see the overpass the same way again. Every curve, every shadow, every fog bank would remind me of it. The shadow on the overpass had marked me. Its presence lingered, bending reality in subtle ways, waiting for me to drive alone again. Weeks later, I returned to Oregon highways. Daytime brought little relief. The memory haunted every turn. Fog creeping along asphalt, overpasses looming, shadows at the edge of vision. I never drive alone at night now. Some say the shadow only appears to those who are truly alone, who feel fear deep in their bones. I call it the overpass stalker. Tall, featureless, impossible, waiting atop railings, tracking those who think they're safe. If you drive Oregon highways after dark, heed this warning. Fog is not just water in the air. Shadows are not always tricks of light. And some overpasses hold more than rust and steel. Even now, when fog curls at the roadside, I feel it watching. And I know I will never be truly free of it. It was late October, and I was hauling a heavy load down Oregon Route 101 along the rugged coastline. Twilight had already surrendered tonight, leaving the highway cloaked in darkness. The ocean on one side roared, waves crashing against jagged rocks. On the other side, dense forests swallowed the faint glow of distant towns. The headlights of my 18-wheeler barely pierced the fog rolling in from the cliffs. I'd been driving for hours, mind fogged with fatigue. The radio crackled occasionally, a mix of static and faint coastal news reports. The sound was oddly comforting, until it stopped entirely. Silence pressed against me, thick and suffocating. That's when I noticed it. A patch of road ahead where my lights seemed to dim, as if the darkness itself was absorbing the beams. The asphalt glistened wet, reflecting the fog like a mirror. My pulse quickened. Something about that stretch felt wrong. I slowed, squinting. Shapes flickered at the forest edge, too tall, too thin, moving in a way that shouldn't be human. My heart hammered. I told myself it was exhaustion, hallucination. Yet instinct screamed that the road ahead was dangerous in a way I couldn't rationalize. As I drove closer, the fog thickened, curling into the cab through cracks in the windows. Shadows seemed to dance just beyond the beams. And then I saw them. Two glowing eyes, perched at the edge of the road, staring, unblinking. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, yet I could feel them tracking me. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel as the cab rattled over uneven asphalt. The fog thickened, swirling around my tires, curling like smoke into the wheel wells. My headlights barely reached the road ahead. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or a coyote. But something about the posture, The way it waited made every rational thought crumble. It was too tall, elongated beyond any known creature, thin limbs disappearing into the mist. Then, a sound soft at first, a scraping like claws on wet pavement. My heart leapt into my throat. I glanced at the mirrors. Nothing. Yet the pressure of being watched intensified, settling in my chest like a stone. I tried speaking aloud to break the tension. "Hey, whatever you are, just stay there." My voice cracked. The eyes didn't flinch. My stomach turned to ice. Every instinct screamed to turn around, to flee. But the road curved sharply, the cliffs to one side, the forest dense and impenetrable to the other. The only way forward was through the fog, toward the unknown. As I drove, the eyes disappeared into the fog. But new shadows appeared, flickering at the edge of visibility. Trees swayed unnaturally, as if bending toward the truck. I felt the temperature drop, my breath fogging the interior glass. A tapping started, soft, rhythmic, coming from the trailer behind me. My heart raced. I spun my head. Nothing. I could see my own reflection, wide-eyed and pale, staring back at me. The road ahead warped in the fog, curves seeming longer, straighter than they should. I told myself it was fatigue, hallucination, a trick of coastal fog and moonlight. But rational thoughts were impossible against the mounting pressure, a feeling that the darkness was alive, moving with purpose, hunting me. Then I glimpsed movement along the roadside, tall, thin silhouettes, almost human but impossibly long-limbed, gliding through the fog. I slammed the brakes briefly, trying to gain composure. They paused, watching. My pulse thundered. The whispers began, faint at first, almost inaudible like wind brushing the cliffs. But there was intent in them, a low, guttural cadence that set my nerves on fire. Something was here. Something was waiting. The fog thickened to near impenetrability, curling around the truck like living tendrils. The headlights barely pierced the gray, reflecting on slick asphalt that shimmered like liquid metal. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, every muscle tensed. I glimpsed movement in the corner of my eyes, tall, spindly forms darting between trees, gliding almost silently. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly I could feel the skin stretch. The tapping from the trailer became louder, now almost synchronized with my racing pulse. I forced myself to breathe, trying to rationalize. Maybe it was another truck passing on a parallel road, or deer feeding along the shoulder. But the stillness of the fog, the unnatural slowness of the shadows, and the creeping pressure in my chest told me otherwise. The whispers began, faint but unmistakable, like wind through hollow bones. I turned on the CB radio, hoping for some static distraction, but it only amplified the low, guttural voices, distorted, almost human. My pulse thundered. Suddenly, a figure appeared directly in the headlights. Featureless, impossibly tall, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. It didn't move forward. Yet I felt it advancing, growing larger, closer. My stomach dropped. My hands shook uncontrollably. I slammed my foot to the accelerator, tires squealing. But the road itself seemed to stretch endlessly. The fog pressed into the cab, as though the world outside had vanished, leaving only me and something hungry waiting in the gray void. The first touch came unexpectedly. A chill ran down my spine, colder than any wind off the ocean. My hand brushed the door handle, and it felt icy, like frost creeping under the metal. I yelped and pulled back. The shadow at the roadside had extended a long, spindly limb, fingers almost dissolving into mist. I slammed on the brakes. The truck shuddered violently. The shadows recoiled for a moment, then seemed to multiply, moving faster, forming shapes that should not exist. My heart pounded as I realized this wasn't just an encounter. This was hunting. The whispering voices grew louder, almost chanting, echoing from the cab and trailer, even the asphalt. Every instinct screamed to run, yet the road twisted endlessly, like a trap laid by some unseen entity. I glanced at the mirrors. Nothing familiar, only swirling fog and ghostly, impossible silhouettes at the tree line. The figure I had glimpsed first hovered near the roadside, staring. Featureless, long-limbed, unblinking. My vision blurred, and I blinked, hoping it was exhaustion. But when I opened my eyes, it was closer. The trailer behind me rattled violently. I leapt forward, pressing the accelerator, tires screeching against wet asphalt. The fog seemed alive, curling into the wheels, wrapping around the cab, whispering threats I couldn't comprehend. I pushed forward, heart hammering, fog pressing against every inch of the cab. Shadows swirled around the trees, forming shapes that looked human, only to vanish when I tried to focus. Every mile felt longer than the last, asphalt stretching endlessly into darkness. The tapping became pounding, as if some creature was keeping pace with the trailer. I glanced at the mirrors. A shape rose above the trees, impossibly tall, gliding, a faceless predator tracking me with precision. Panic surged, and I swerved, tires squealing on the wet road. I could hear whispers again, low, guttural, forming words I couldn't understand. My breath fogged the windshield, condensation dripping down as my hands shook. The fog seemed alive, curling into every crack, every vent, pressing on me, suffocating. Ahead, a bridge appeared, my only chance to escape the forested stretch. But as I approached, the shadow followed, gliding across the asphalt like liquid darkness, moving faster than humanly possible. My pulse surged, adrenaline hammering, as I realized there might be no escape at all. The bridge rose above a churning river, its metal structure dark against the night sky. My headlights reflected on the water below, mist curling upward, obscuring the far end. I felt the shadow press against the cab as I entered, though nothing physically touched me. It hovered alongside the trailer, featureless face tilted, limbs impossibly long, gliding effortlessly. The pounding on the trailer intensified, synchronized with the rhythm of my heart. I gritted my teeth and pushed forward. The fog thickened, forming walls around the bridge. I could barely see the end. Every reflection in mirrors became distorted, elongated shadows twisting unnaturally. My pulse raced. Then, it extended one limb toward the cab. Frost seeped through the metal, curling across the dashboard. I screamed, slammed my foot to the accelerator, tires squealing, engine groaning under strain. The bridge stretched like an endless corridor. When I finally reached the far side, the fog began to thin slightly. The shadow paused, featureless face tilting, then vanished into the mist. My chest heaved, hands trembling on the wheel, tears in my eyes. But I knew it hadn't left entirely. It was waiting. I reached the next rest area, dimly lit, asphalt glistening with fog and mist. Other trucks were parked, drivers asleep or chatting quietly. Relief surged, but I didn't dare breathe easy. Every reflective surface hinted at movement. I checked mirrors and trailer, empty. Yet the pressure on my chest remained, icy and suffocating. I could swear I saw shapes in the fog, fleeting, elongated, watching. My hands shook as I parked, sliding from the cab in a daze. The whispers persisted, faint now, echoing in the distance, like the wind through hollow bones. The shadow had not disappeared. It had only retreated, waiting for me to continue, to venture back onto the road it ruled. Sleep was impossible. Coffee did nothing to calm my nerves. The highway haunted my mind, every turn, every fog bank reminding me of its presence. I realized the road had chosen me. I would never drive these coastal highways the same way again. Weeks later, I returned to Oregon highways. Daylight offered little comfort. Every curve, every cliff, every patch of fog brought the memory flooding back. My pulse quickened at the sight of a shadow, however small. I never drive alone at night anymore. Even in daylight, fog curls along the asphalt like fingers. I feel watched constantly. The road that swallowed the light has left its mark. Some say the shadows appear only to those alone enough, fearful enough. I call it the fog lurker. Elongated, featureless, impossible, hunting travelers along lonely coastal highways, waiting for the right moment. Even now, when fog rises along the cliffs, I feel it watching. And I know the hunt is never truly over. If you drive Oregon coastal highways at night, take heed. Fog is not just mist. Shadows are not mere tricks of light. Overpasses, bridges, and cliffs hide watchers. Do not linger. Do not slow unnecessarily. If you see glowing eyes, elongated shapes, or hear whispers carried by the fog, keep moving. Some entities do not forgive hesitation. I survived the fog, the shadows, the whispers. But I carry it with me. In my heart, in my dreams, in every stretch of highway that vanishes into mist. The fog lurker is real, and it is patient. And one day, it may find someone else. It was late September, and I was hauling a heavy refrigerated load down Oregon Route 138. The road snaking through thick, shadowed forests. Night had already swallowed the last remnants of sunlight, leaving the highway a ribbon of darkness. Fog rolled off the river in tendrils, clinging to the asphalt like smoke. I'd been driving for over 10 hours, exhausted but alert. The cab was silent, except for the hum of the engine and occasional static from the CB radio. Drivers told me Route 138 was haunted. Stories of lost hikers, phantom vehicles, and shadowy figures had been passed down among truckers for years. I dismissed it as superstition until I saw her. At the edge of the fog, near a sharp bend in the highway, a figure appeared. A young woman, pale and soaked from the mist, thumbing for a ride. She wore a tattered jacket, eyes wide and pleading. My first thought, a real hitchhiker needing help. My second, something about her felt wrong, too still, too perfect, too still. I slowed the truck. The radio crackled and hissed. The fog thickened, curling like living fingers around the cab. As I approached, she stepped onto the asphalt, motionless, staring. My pulse quickened. Something about the way she moved, gliding rather than walking, made my chest tighten with fear. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel. A trucker's instinct screamed, this wasn't normal. But I was a human being. Couldn't I help someone? Or was this a trap laid by the road itself? I slowed to a crawl, keeping my eyes on her. She raised a hand, motioning for me to stop. Her face was pale, almost luminous in the fog, with dark, empty eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I hesitated, every instinct screaming not to pick her up. She smiled faintly, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Please, just a ride," she whispered. The voice was soft, almost hypnotic. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel. My mind raced with warnings. Lost hiker, trick, something else? The road stretched ahead, disappearing into thick fog. One wrong move, and I might vanish with it. Yet the rational side of me, the side that believed in helping people, fought back. I eased the truck closer. The fog shifted suddenly, swirling around the trailer like hands. The air inside the cab turned icy, frost forming on the edges of the dashboard. My breath fogged, heart pounding. She stepped closer to the truck, perfectly still. Her eyes, hollow and unblinking, seemed to pierce my soul. I realized I was making a choice, one that might cost me more than just the night. Against every instinct, I unlocked the passenger door. The moment she stepped in, a cold gust swept the cab, frost creeping along the dashboard. The heater struggled, rattling. Her eyes never blinked. I could feel her presence pressing against my chest, heavy and suffocating. The radio crackled again, static, then whispers, low and guttural, seemingly emanating from her. I tried to speak. Where are you going?" She didn't answer. She just sat there, still, staring at the fog outside, her pale hands folded in her lap. Minutes passed in silence, the kind of silence that presses on the soul. Every instinct screamed to stop, to get her out, but I couldn't explain why I didn't. The fog outside seemed to thicken around the truck, curling closer, reacting to her presence. The road twisted sharply ahead. Headlights cut through mist, reflecting shadows that weren't mine. I could feel her watching me, almost guiding my path. Every nerve in my body screamed that this was wrong, yet I couldn't move. Then, in the side mirror, I saw it. A dark shape moving alongside the trailer. Tall, thin, impossibly fast. My heart thumped violently. I realized I wasn't just transporting a hitchhiker. I had drawn something with her into my cab. The moment passed, but the tension didn't. The fog outside thickened, curling like living smoke along the edges of the cab. Her eyes remained fixed on nothing, unblinking, pale and hollow. My pulse raced, every nerve screaming danger. Then came the whispers. Low, guttural, distorted, carried through the static of the CB radio. It wasn't coming from her lips. It was coming from the cab itself, from the trailer, from the darkness that pressed against every corner of the truck. I swallowed hard, trying to focus on the road ahead. Through the windshield, shadows began to move in the fog. Tall, thin figures gliding along the roadside. Each seemed to flicker in and out of visibility, defying physics. I could hear scraping along the asphalt, synchronized with the pounding of my heart. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel. I tried to reason. Exhaustion, hallucination, coastal fog, trick of the headlights. But every instinct screamed that I was no longer alone. She was the lure, and these shadows were the predators. I realized with horror that the moment I allowed her into the cab, I had crossed into a nightmare with no clear exit. Ahead, a bridge spanned a churning river, its steel structure looming through the mist. The shadows glided toward it, waiting. And my passenger, still motionless, seemed almost to guide them. The bridge approached like a dark mouth waiting to swallow me whole. The fog pressed inward, curling into the cab, obscuring the edges of reality. I could feel the shadows at my sides, just at the edge of perception. The passenger shifted slightly. That small movement, almost imperceptible, sent a shiver down my spine. The whispers grew louder, forming a chant-like cadence, vibrating through the metal of the truck. My teeth chattered as frost formed on the dashboard. Glancing at the mirrors, I glimpsed movement that should have been impossible. Long-limbed, faceless figures gliding beside the trailer, their motions fluid yet unnatural. They kept pace effortlessly, as if reality bent for them. I floored the accelerator. Tires squealed on the wet asphalt, engine roaring. The bridge seemed to stretch endlessly, a corridor of steel and fog. My pulse thundered, my hands ached from gripping the wheel. The young woman remained silent, almost serene, as if she were part of the haunting. I realized the terrifying truth. She was the key, and the shadows were bound to her. I had unwittingly invited them into my path. A sudden chill swept the cab, freezing the air inside. Frost crept along the edges of the windows, forming delicate patterns that seemed almost deliberate. I gasped as something brushed my arm, not solid, yet icy and heavy. The whispers intensified, echoing, vibrating through my bones. The young woman's hollow eyes met mine, but she didn't blink. It was then I realized she wasn't human. Something unnatural had hitched a ride. From the side mirror, a shadow stretched impossibly, limbs bending and twisting in ways reality forbade. It reached toward the cab, slow and deliberate. I slammed the accelerator, but the fog thickened in response, curling around the truck like living smoke. The sound of scraping metal followed, synchronized with the pounding of my heart. Every instinct screamed to stop, to flee, but the bridge stretched endlessly ahead. The shadows moved with purpose, patient and relentless. My breath fogged the windshield. The truck felt like it was alive, vibrating under some unseen weight. I realized that survival meant more than just speed. It meant keeping the cab and its otherworldly passenger intact. Once across the bridge, the fog briefly thinned, but the sense of being hunted never left. The shadows moved in tandem, gliding across asphalt and roadside, their forms elongating and shrinking like liquid darkness. Every mile felt like hours. Every shadow seemed closer, every whisper louder. My hands ached, my chest burned, and the cab vibrated as though the truck itself feared the pursuit. The young woman finally spoke, a whisper that barely cut through the roar of the engine. "They are patient, but they always follow." My blood ran cold. Her hollow eyes remained fixed ahead, guiding or perhaps commanding. Tires skidded on wet asphalt, the fog curling around them like hands. The shadows swirled closer, impossible shapes that defied comprehension, reaching, waiting. My mind screamed, but I had no choice, only to drive faster. The road curved sharply, cliffs rising beside me, ocean crashing below. I realized that escape might not be possible. I was trapped in a corridor of fog, shadows, and something far older than myself. Suddenly, a figure appeared directly ahead on the road. I slammed the brakes, tires screeching, heart pounding. The figure wasn't human. Tall, elongated, faceless, its presence radiating cold. The young woman's lips curled in a faint, eerie smile. The shadows seemed to condense around the figure, pressing inward like a living fog. My mind reeled. I tried to swerve, but the cab resisted, as if the road itself had become an extension of the nightmare. The impact never came, yet the pressure of the entity against the truck was real, suffocating. Scraping metal echoed from the trailer as the shadows pressed closer. Every instinct screamed terror, every rational thought vanished. Then, just as suddenly, the road cleared, fog thinning slightly. I was moving again, heart hammering, hands trembling. The shadows receded, but the icy weight in the cab remained. I dared not look at my passenger. Finally, I spotted a rest area, dimly lit. Relief surged, but the sense of dread didn't leave. Every reflective surface hinted at movement. I parked, trembling, checking mirrors and trailer. Nothing. The fog outside curled along asphalt, like fingers reaching for me. The shadows hadn't disappeared. They were merely waiting. The young woman remained seated, silent, eyes hollow and unblinking. I realized the truth. She was the key, and I had transported something unnatural across the road. Even now, I could feel it. The fog, the whispers, the impossible shadows lingering in my mind. Sleep was impossible. Coffee did little. The route haunted me in dreams, every turn and patch of fog bringing the memory flooding back. Weeks later, I returned to Oregon highways. Daylight offered little comfort. Fog curling along the asphalt still triggered a panic I could barely control. I never pick up hitchhikers at night anymore. Every shadow, every flicker in the fog, reminds me of her and the unseen predators that followed. I call it the roadside hitchhiker, pale, hollow-eyed, and always accompanied by shadows that bend reality, waiting for the next unwary driver. If you drive Oregon highways at night, heed this warning. Fog is not just mist. Shadows are not illusions. Some rides are better left refused. Even now, when fog curls across the asphalt, I feel them watching. And I know the hunt is far from over. It was late October, a moonless night, and I was driving my 18-wheeler along Oregon Highway 20. The map showed a stretch locals called the Dead Zone, a remote area where cell signals vanished and radio waves went silent. The forested hills pressed close to the asphalt, black silhouettes against the faint starlight. I'd been hauling freight for 12 hours, exhausted but alert. The hum of the engine and the tires on wet asphalt were my only companions. The night was unusually quiet. No wildlife, no distant towns. Just the hum of the truck and the whisper of wind through skeletal trees. About 30 minutes into the dead zone, my CB radio went dead, a thick static filling the cab. I tried the phone, no signal. Panic pricked at my mind. Isolation settled in like a physical weight. The fog rolled in, thick and cold, curling across the highway, reflecting my headlights in ghostly patterns. Then, a shadow flickered at the edge of the trees. Too tall, too slow, but unmistakably humanoid. My pulse leapt. I told myself it was a trick of the fog, exhaustion, imagination. But instinct screamed otherwise. As I pressed forward, the shadow seemed to move with me, maintaining distance, watching. My breath fogged the windshield. The air inside the cab had turned icy, frost curling along the edges of the dashboard. Something about this stretch felt alive. Like the road itself was aware of me, minutes passed in oppressive silence. The CB remained dead, my phone displayed no signal. The forest pressed inward, fog curling like fingers around the trailer. Every mile felt longer, the asphalt stretching endlessly. Then came a sound, soft at first, like metal scraping on asphalt. I glanced at the mirrors. Nothing. Yet instinct screamed that I was being followed. The shadow from before seemed to have multiplied, flickering at the edges of the fog, elongated and faceless. I tried to speak aloud to break the tension. Is someone there? My voice sounded weak, swallowed by the fog. The whisper came back, low, guttural, almost human, but wrong, echoing from the cab and the trees simultaneously. The air turned colder, frost forming along the edges of the steering wheel. I realized with mounting horror that the dead zone was more than just isolated. It was inhabited by something aware, patient, and hungry. The highway twisted, asphalt slick with condensation. The shapes in the fog shifted, gliding rather than walking, keeping pace effortlessly. Every instinct screamed to turn around, but escape felt impossible. I was halfway through the dead zone when something touched the trailer. A faint vibration, like claws scraping metal, synchronized with my heartbeat. I froze. My hands shook on the wheel, breath fogging the windshield. Glancing at the mirrors, I saw them clearly now. Tall, thin, faceless figures gliding effortlessly beside the cab and trailer. Their limbs bent impossibly, moving in ways that defied logic. They weren't trying to hide. They were waiting. The whispering grew louder, echoing inside the cab. I tried to turn on the radio, hoping static would drown them out, but it only amplified the distorted voices, repeating words I couldn't understand. I realized with chilling clarity, these entities weren't human. And the moment I entered this dead zone, I had become prey. The young forest stretched endlessly, hiding more than shadows. The fog pressed in from every side. Panic surged. I slammed my foot to the accelerator, tires squealing on wet asphalt. The road seemed to stretch ahead endlessly, the horizon swallowed by darkness and fog. The shadows matched my speed, patient, relentless, gliding silently. The fog swallowed the road completely, leaving only the dim glow of my headlights. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, twisting impossibly in the mist. Every curve revealed nothing but endless gray, yet I could feel the shadows keeping pace. I tried to focus on the cab, the wheel, the road ahead, but the frost creeping along the dashboard reminded me they were close, inside my mind, if not my truck. The whispers returned, low and distorted, almost intelligible, promising pain or worse. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. Ahead, a faint glimmer appeared in the fog. I squinted. Another truck, a reflective sign. Number. The shadowed figure was moving slowly across the highway, impossibly tall and faceless, limbs bending at angles that made my stomach turn. Panic surged. I hit the accelerator, tires squealing on slick asphalt. The figure glided effortlessly, matching my speed, pressing forward in a way that made my chest tighten with terror. Every instinct screamed to escape, but the dead zone had no exits. Only winding asphalt and patient predators. I glanced at the mirrors. Another figure appeared behind the trailer, taller, darker, moving with the fog like it was alive. The whispering voices swelled, echoing in the cab, synchronized with the pounding of my heart. I realized with a cold certainty. There was no turning back. Survival meant driving faster than fear itself. The bridge appeared suddenly, a black outline over a churning river below. The fog pressed closer, curling like fingers against the cab, restricting visibility. I could feel the shadows just outside the headlights, gliding silently across the wet steel. The cab shook as a cold wind swept through, frost crawling across the dashboard. I gritted my teeth, trying to control the truck as the whispers grew louder, almost chanting. The elongated figures moved with precision, tracking every motion. Ahead, the bridge seemed endless. I floored the accelerator, tires squealing. The shadows followed, gliding in perfect rhythm, moving faster than physics allowed. I realized they weren't human. They weren't bound by reality. The cab felt alive, vibrating with a presence I couldn't see. My passenger seat, empty, seemed to pulse with cold energy, as if whatever I had brought into the dead zone had anchored the hunt. I swallowed hard. This bridge wasn't just a passage, it was a gauntlet. Every second could be my last. The fog thickened, obscuring the far end, leaving only my headlights and the silhouettes that had become my relentless pursuers. A sudden vibration ran through the trailer, like metal being clawed. My stomach dropped. The shadows weren't just following anymore. They were interacting, touching, pressing against reality itself. I glanced at the mirrors. One figure was impossibly close, limbs bending backward, faceless head tilting toward the cab. I could feel its presence pressing through the fog, through the steel, through my very chest. Whispers echoed inside my mind. I couldn't distinguish between sound and thought. Keep moving. They are patient, always patient. my breath fogged the windshield. My hands shook uncontrollably. I slammed my foot to the accelerator. Tires squealed, engine roared, fog thickened. Every mile felt endless, as if the road itself had stretched into infinity. The cab trembled under some unseen weight. I realized the hunt wasn't just around me. It was inside me, seated in every shadow, every curve of the asphalt. Once past the bridge, the fog thinned slightly, giving the illusion of relief. But the shadows were relentless, gliding faster, bending reality to match my every movement. My pulse pounded in my ears. Every curve revealed new horrors. Elongated, faceless figures emerging from the mist, moving as though the asphalt were water. Tires skidded on wet patches. My chest burned. My hands were numb from gripping the wheel. I realized with growing dread that the dead zone had no exits, only endless forest, fog, and entities that existed outside comprehension. Every instinct screamed for escape. Yet, the deeper I drove, the more I felt they were shaping the road to trap me. Then came a scraping sound, metal against metal, synchronized with my heartbeat. The shadows were closer than ever, their forms twisting and bending impossibly, each movement an affront to nature itself. I pushed the truck harder, engine roaring, fog curling into the cab. Survival depended not just on speed, but on maintaining my sanity. One misstep, one hesitation, and I would become part of the dead zone forever. Ahead, the road plunged into a long, dark tunnel. The asphalt glistened with condensation, walls slick and reflective. As I entered, the fog condensed into a heavy mist, curling around the cab like smoke. The shadows pressed in tighter, their elongated forms bending unnaturally along the tunnel walls. The whispers became deafening, not from outside, but inside my skull. Guttural, chanting, repeating words I couldn't understand. Frost formed on the steering wheel, then the mirrors. My pulse thundered in my ears. Glancing sideways, I glimpsed something impossible. A shadow pressed against the cab's window from the outside, faceless, limbs bending in angles that defied logic. I could feel it leaning, testing, waiting. Panic surged. My foot slammed the accelerator, but the truck felt heavier, as if something invisible pressed from above. Inside, I realized the cab was no longer just a vehicle. It had become a conduit. The dead zone wasn't simply haunted. It fed, manipulated, and trapped those who dared traverse it at night. The tunnel stretched endlessly, lights flickering above, shadows dancing across slick walls. I could see the faint glimmer of an exit ahead. Salvation, maybe, if I could survive the passage. Every second in this tunnel stretched into an eternity of fear. The exit appeared as a distant pinprick of light, but the shadows intensified. One stretched impossibly, reaching for the cab, limbs bending backwards, faceless head tilting toward me. Another seemed to emerge from the mirrors themselves, gliding silently inside the cab's reflections. I slammed the accelerator, tires screeching, heart hammering. The cab vibrated under some unseen force, frost crawling along every surface. Whispers echoed in my skull, urging me forward, promising that the dead zone wouldn't release me alive. The exit approached. The tunnel walls seemed to narrow, compressing space. One shadow lunged, brushing against the trailer. I screamed, adrenaline surging, and swerved violently, the truck skidding on wet asphalt. The shadows recoiled momentarily, then reformed, relentless and patient. With one final push, I blasted through the tunnel exit. Fog thinned slightly. The shadows stayed at the edge, flickering in and out, retreating, but not gone. I exhaled, shaking, heart still racing. My hands bled from gripping the wheel. I realized with chilling clarity I had survived, but they hadn't released me. They would wait, patient, outside the veil of perception, ready for the next unwary traveler. Weeks later, I returned to the highway in daylight. The dead zone appeared ordinary: asphalt, trees, sunlight filtering through the mist. Yet every curve, every patch of fog, carried memory. Every shadow, every whisper, remained imprinted on my mind. I never drive this stretch at night again. The memory of faceless figures, the frost creeping in my cab, and the whispering voices is etched in my bones. They weren't ghosts. They weren't illusions. They were something older, patient, and hungry, waiting for drivers to stray too far from reality. I call it the highway of lost signals. The fog, the shadows, the whispers, they endure, always watching. And for those who dare enter at night, there may be no escape. Every time I hear static on a CB or fog curls across asphalt, I feel their presence. And I know the dead zone still hungers. It was mid-November, and I was driving my 18-wheeler along Oregon Highway 138, a stretch notorious among truckers for sudden fog and deserted cabins. The late autumn air was biting, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen pine needles. Moonlight struggled through thick clouds, leaving the road in partial darkness. I'd been hauling a refrigerated load all day, fatigue settling into my muscles. The only sounds were the hum of the engine, the steady rhythm of tires on wet asphalt, and the occasional distant hoot of an owl. As I navigated a sharp bend, a faint light flickered in the fog off the road. A small, weathered cabin sat at the edge of the forest. Smoke curled from a crooked chimney. Relief mixed with curiosity. I rarely saw any signs of life in this stretch, and the light seemed almost unnatural. Instinct whispered caution, but exhaustion urged me to slow. As I passed, I could make out the faint silhouette of a figure standing by the doorway. Unmoving, pale, partially obscured by the fog. My pulse quickened. There was something about its stance, rigid and deliberate, that didn't feel human. I forced my eyes on the road ahead, shaking the feeling off. But the fog seemed to thicken behind me, curling along the cab like fingers. Something about the cabin and that figure told me this night would not be ordinary. The fog thickened as I drove past the cabin. Headlights barely penetrated the dense mist, but I could still see movement at the edge of the tree line. Elongated, unnatural shadows gliding silently behind the trees. I tried to focus on the cab, on the road, on the rhythm of my tires. Yet the figure by the cabin door seemed to linger in my mind. There was something almost expectant in its posture. It wasn't moving, but I could feel its gaze, pulling at the edges of my awareness. Suddenly my CB crackled. Static, low growls, whispers I couldn't understand. I slammed the radio off. My phone showed no signal. Isolation enveloped me like the fog itself. The road twisted, asphalt slick with condensation. I glanced in the mirrors. There, barely visible. Shadows moved with impossible fluidity, matching the truck's speed. I could feel them pressing against the edges of perception. Panic clawed at my chest, frost forming on the dashboard. I realized with a sinking sense of dread. The cabin was not just abandoned. Something lived there, waiting, tethered to the fog and the road, patient and deliberate. The fog swallowed the road completely. Headlights reflected off wet asphalt in eerie, distorted patterns. Every curve felt endless. I could sense the shadows moving with me, patient, waiting, feeding off my unease. A low guttural whisper echoed inside the cab. Not from outside, but inside my skull. Frost spread across the edges of the dashboard, forming jagged patterns. My pulse thundered. Glancing in the mirrors, I saw movement impossible to explain. Figures elongated and faceless, gliding effortlessly beside the cabin trailer. One paused just beyond the fog's reach, then continued silently, perfectly synchronized with my speed. I tried to tell myself it was exhaustion, imagination, fog playing tricks. But my gut screamed otherwise. These were not human. The cabin, the figure, the fog. It had drawn me into something alive, something patient and unrelenting. The air inside the cab turned icy, breath fogging the windshield. Every instinct told me to turn around, to escape. But the road ahead was an endless corridor of trees, fog, and the unseen watchers lurking in the mist. I realized I had crossed into their territory, and every mile I drove was another step into a nightmare without exit. The fog thickened, curling into the cab like icy fingers. Every shadow along the roadside seemed to stretch unnaturally, bending toward me. I could feel a presence, patient, deliberate, watching. Then I saw it. A figure emerging from the mist near the cabin. Not moving like a human, but gliding, limbs bending impossibly, faceless head tilting as if observing. My breath caught. The fog seemed alive, moving with it, responding to its presence. I swallowed hard and tried to focus on the road. Every instinct screamed danger. The truck's engine roared, tires squealing on wet asphalt, yet the figure maintained its pace, following, waiting. Whispers echoed in my skull, low and distorted, almost words, but not quite. Frost formed along the edges of the dashboard, curling like skeletal fingers. I realized the cabin had been a lure. The figure, the fog, the silence, all part of the same trap. I gritted my teeth. I had to survive. I had to leave the dead zone before it claimed me. But the fog pressed in from every direction, and the road twisted like a living thing, keeping me inside its grip. A sudden scraping sound jolted me. Something had touched the trailer, claws or metal, I couldn't tell. My pulse spiked. Glancing at the mirrors, I saw them clearly. Faceless, elongated figures gliding alongside, impossibly tall, bending in unnatural angles. The whispers grew louder, echoing inside the cab. I realized with horror. This wasn't just a haunted stretch of highway. The cabin had anchored them here, feeding off isolation and fear. I slammed my foot to the accelerator. Tires squealed, asphalt slick beneath them. The figures kept pace effortlessly. One pressed against the fog just beyond my headlights, almost leaning into the cab, testing, waiting. The cab trembled as if alive, frost creeping along the edges of the dashboard. I couldn't look away. I could feel the dead zone's pull, a weight pressing on my chest, a presence older than logic itself. Every instinct screamed, survive, or become part of the fog forever. The fog thickened, crawling across the highway like liquid. Shadows bent and twisted along the roadside, gliding closer. Each mile felt endless, the road stretching into infinity. I caught movement in the mirrors, figures multiplying, gliding silently beside the cabin trailer. The whispers became a chorus in my skull, low guttural voices repeating words I couldn't comprehend. A chill swept the cab. Breath fogged the windshield, frost spreading. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white. The cabin's figure, or what I thought I had left behind, seemed to have attached itself to the fog, moving with me, tethered across the highway. Every instinct screamed to escape, but the fog pressed inward, narrowing the road, shaping reality. It was alive, aware, patient. Every shadow, every whisper was deliberate, designed to unnerve, to trap. I realized with dread, this was no ordinary night. I was trapped in a corridor of fog, cabin's curse, and impossible predators that existed outside comprehension. The headlights illuminated a glimpse of the cabin again, now deeper in the fog, as if it had moved. Impossible in reality. Its silhouette was warped, smoke curling unnaturally from the crooked chimney. Whispers swelled in my skull. I could feel the presence of something watching, patient, aware, waiting for me to falter. The fog seemed alive, wrapping around the cab, pressing against the windshield as if trying to prevent escape. The shadows elongated further, gliding alongside, merging with the fog itself. Frost crept across the mirrors. Every instinct screamed, survive or become part of the cabin's curse. I forced the truck forward, tires squealing on wet asphalt. Every bend, every curve, the dead zone conspired to trap me, to pull me back into the fog, into the cabin's unseen grasp. I realized the cabin wasn't just a building. It was a beacon, a lure, a predator disguised as home, feeding off the fear and isolation of anyone who passed by. Fog swirled, shadows gliding faster, bending around the curves. My pulse pounded in my ears. Every mile stretched into eternity. A scraping sound hit the trailer again. Closer this time. One shadow pressed against the fog near the cab, impossibly tall, faceless head tilting toward me. Whispers echoed, deafening, vibrating in my skull. The cab shuddered under unseen pressure. Frost spread across every surface. The cabin's figure, somehow tethered to the fog, followed relentlessly. Every instinct screamed, push forward, survive, or perish. I slammed the accelerator. Tires skidded, engine roaring. Shadows lunged and recoiled, gliding as if reality bent for them. The highway twisted unnaturally, trapping me in the dead zone, forcing me through a corridor of fog, cold, and patience. A distant pinprick of light appeared. The highway clearing, fog thinning slightly. Relief surged, but terror persisted. Shadows pressed to the edge of perception, gliding silently, patient and relentless. I floored the accelerator. Tires squealed. The cab trembled, frost curling on mirrors, dashboard, windshield. Whispers echoed in my skull, guttural, chanting, warning that escape was temporary. The cabin's figure didn't appear again, yet its presence lingered in the fog, tethered to the road, to the shadows, to me. Every instinct screamed, survive, but never forget. Finally, the fog thinned completely. The dead zone behind me seemed ordinary again, asphalt, trees, autumn mist, yet I knew the curse endured. The cabin, the shadows, the whispers, patient, waiting for the next traveler. Weeks later, I avoided Highway 138 at night. Daylight revealed only asphalt, trees, and ordinary mist. Yet the memory haunted me. Every bend, every shadow, every whisper etched in my mind. I realized the cabin was not just a place. It was alive, patient, and hungry. The fog, the shadows, the whispers, they endure, waiting for anyone alone enough to fall into the dead zone. I call it the cabin in the fog. The horrors of that night are permanent, etched into the asphalt, the fog, and the shadows that move just beyond perception. I survived. But the dead zone never releases its prey fully. Every time fog curls across an empty highway, I feel it. Watching, waiting, hungry. It was a bitter December night, temperatures plunging below freezing. I was hauling a heavy load along Oregon Highway 58 when I came upon Devil's Bend, a notorious curve that locals whispered about but never stayed near after dark. The map showed nothing unusual, but truckers' tales painted it as cursed, haunted, a place where the road itself devoured unwary travelers. The headlights cut through fog like knives. Snow dusted the asphalt, crunching beneath the tires. Trees loomed on both sides, skeletal and black, their branches clawing at the sky. Isolation weighed down every inch of the cab. As I navigated the bend, a faint, flickering light appeared at the roadside, a decrepit gas station that seemed abandoned. Windows shattered, doors hanging crooked, yet a single flickering neon sign read "Open." Something about it made my stomach knot. I knew no trucker would stop here at night, yet my exhaustion and curiosity pushed me closer. I slowed the truck, heart hammering. The air inside the cab grew frigid, breath fogging the windshield. Shadows moved unnaturally across the broken windows. I glimpsed a figure inside, pale, unmoving, faceless. It wasn't human, yet it watched, patient, deliberate. I forced my eyes forward, reminding myself of the load I had to deliver. But instinct screamed, "Turn back. Escape now." Something about Devil's Bend didn't want me alive. I pulled closer to the gas station, tires crunching on icy gravel. The figure remained in the window, still faceless, yet impossibly aware of me. The fog thickened, curling into the cab like icy fingers, pressing against the windshield. My CB crackled with distorted whispers, static cutting through the silence. My phone showed no signal. Isolation wasn't just physical, it was psychological, pressing into my mind, whispering fear I couldn't escape. Curiosity and fear warred inside me. Exhaustion made every shadow seem alive. I caught movement in the corner of my eye. More faceless figures slipping between the ruined pumps, elongated limbs bending impossibly, moving without sound. I realized I had crossed a threshold. This wasn't merely abandoned. Devil's Bend, the station, the fog. They were alive, sentient, waiting for anyone foolish enough to stop. Fingers of frost crept along the dashboard. Whispers echoed in my skull, almost intelligible, distorted promises and threats. Every instinct screamed to flee, but turning the truck around felt impossible, as if the road had changed to trap me. I tried to push forward, but the road seemed to narrow unnaturally. Shadows flitted along the roadside, gliding beside the truck. Frost spread across mirrors, dashboard, windshield. My pulse thundered. One figure appeared at the passenger side window, impossibly tall, faceless, limbs bending backward. Its presence pressed against reality, a cold weight in my chest. Whispers echoed in my skull, taunting, patient, deliberate. The cab trembled. Tires squealed on slick asphalt. I realized the station wasn't just a location, it was a lure. Devil's Bend wasn't simply haunted, it was predatory. It shaped the fog, the road, the shadows, bending them to ensnare travelers. Every instinct screamed, survive. But survival required more than speed. It required awareness, courage, and luck, all of which I felt slipping away under the weight of icy fog and faceless eyes. I slammed my foot to the accelerator. Shadows lunged, gliding along the cab, testing boundaries. The whispers crescendoed, echoing in tandem with my heartbeat. Every mile through Devil's Bend became a gauntlet, a test of endurance and terror. The cab shuddered violently as something grazed the trailer. My stomach dropped. I glanced in the mirrors. One of the faceless figures had reached the side, impossibly tall, limbs bending at unnatural angles. It moved with the fog, gliding silently alongside, testing me. Whispers echoed inside my skull, not external sound, but thoughts, voices taunting me. Frost curled along the edges of the dashboard. Every instinct screamed, escape. But I couldn't turn around. The road had changed, narrowed, trapping me in Devil's Bend. I gritted my teeth, gripping the wheel until my knuckles whitened. The figure pressed closer, and for a moment, it felt as if it could reach inside the cab, through steel and glass and into my mind. Tires squealed on icy asphalt. The engine roared. The shadows kept pace effortlessly, their presence bending reality. Each movement felt orchestrated, deliberate. This was not just a haunted highway. It was alive, and it had claimed many before me. I realized. The abandoned station, the bend, the fog. They were all connected, anchored by something ancient, patient, and hungry. I couldn't pause, couldn't hesitate. Survival meant pushing forward, no matter what unseen horrors trailed me. The fog thickened, wrapping around the cab like living tendrils. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Headlights illuminated fleeting glimpses of shadowy forms, figures with impossible angles, gliding alongside the cab, merging with the mist. I could feel the dead zone's intent, pressing in from all sides. My breath fogged the windshield, frost spreading across the mirrors. Every instinct screamed to stop, but stopping would mean death. The whispers intensified, chanting in a guttural rhythm, promising something I couldn't comprehend. A scraping sound on the trailer sent a shiver down my spine. One shadow leaned in, faceless head tilting toward me. The cab trembled under the unseen weight. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel, pushing forward. The abandoned station flickered in my peripheral vision, impossibly close, and then gone. The bend twisted unnaturally, the road alive, curving in ways that made no sense. I understood fully. Devil's Bend didn't want me to leave. It wanted me to become part of it. The highway narrowed into a canyon-like passage, trees pressing overhead. Fog thickened into near-solid walls. Shadows moved along the cliffs, gliding effortlessly, reaching impossibly toward the cab. I could hear whispers inside my skull, synchronized with my heartbeat, pressing into my mind. Tires screeched on the icy asphalt. The cab trembled violently, as if reality itself was bending. One shadow emerged from the fog directly in front of me. Impossibly tall. Limbs bending backwards, faceless head tilting in unnatural curiosity. I slammed the accelerator. Skidding through the bend, the figure vanished, only to appear beside the cab moments later. Frost formed along the windshield. Every instinct screamed terror. The dead zone wasn't just haunted. It manipulated perception, bending time, space, and fear itself to trap me. The fog seemed to thicken with every mile, curling into the cab like icy fingers. Shadows stretched impossibly along the roadside, gliding closer with silent, predatory intent. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, matching the scraping of something along the trailer. One faceless figure appeared at the passenger window. Limbs bent backward in unnatural angles, head tilting, following my every move. My breath fogged the glass. Frost crept across the dashboard and mirrors. Every instinct screamed, keep moving or perish. The whispers crescendoed inside my skull, almost intelligible, guttural voices urging surrender. Tires screeched on icy asphalt as I pushed the truck forward, skidding through sharp bends. The road twisted, narrowed, and warped. I realized with growing horror, Devil's Bend was alive. Each shadow, each whisper, each curl of fog seemed intentional, a coordinated effort to unnerve, disorient, and trap me. The abandoned station flickered in the fog, impossibly close, and then vanished. Every mile was a test. To survive, I had to fight panic, fear, and the cold pull of the dead zone itself. Ahead, the fog parted slightly, revealing a straight stretch of highway. Relief surged, but terror persisted. Shadows pressed to the edges of perception, moving silently, impossibly fast. One lunged near the cab, testing boundaries, bending the very air around it. The cab trembled. Frost covered the windshield, dashboard, and mirrors. Whispers echoed inside my skull like a chorus, warning me that escape was fleeting. The abandoned gas station appeared in my peripheral vision again, closer, warped, almost alive, then gone. I floored the accelerator, tires squealing, sliding on icy patches. Shadows lunged and recoiled, following my every motion. Time itself seemed to stretch, each second an eternity of fear and anticipation. I realized survival was temporary. The dead zone, the fog, the faceless entities, they were patient, eternal, waiting for the next trucker to falter. Escape wasn't freedom. It was postponement. Suddenly, one shadow lunged from the fog directly in front of the cab, bending reality itself. Tires skidded, the truck fish-tailed. I swerved violently, barely keeping control. Heart hammering, breath fogging the windshield, I pushed forward with every ounce of strength. The whispers in my skull became a deafening chorus. Frost spread in jagged patterns across the dashboard, mirrors, and windshield. Shadows lunged, gliding, retreating, never stopping. The abandoned gas station flickered in vision, taunting, unreal. Then, as if the highway itself intervened, the fog thinned. The shadows recoiled, hesitant. The road straightened, asphalt clear. The dead zone had allowed me passage, but only by sheer will and relentless movement. I realized with icy dread, the entities had observed, tested, and allowed me to survive. I sped past Devil's Bend, heart hammering, hands shaking. The whispers faded, but their presence lingered, a constant weight in my mind. The stretch of highway ahead appeared normal, daylight faintly breaking the horizon. Weeks later, I drove this stretch only in daylight. Devil's Bend looked ordinary, asphalt, trees, faint mist. Yet the memory persisted. Every bend, shadow, whisper, and flicker of fog remained etched in my mind. The abandoned gas station, the faceless figures, the fog, they were real. I survived, but not unmarked. Every time I see fog curling across a deserted highway, I feel their presence, patient, eternal, and hungry. I call it the last stop at Devil's Bend. The entities endure, waiting for the next traveler. They are not ghosts. They are predators outside human comprehension, tethered to the fog, the road, and the abandoned places of Oregon. Even now, I hesitate at foggy corners. Every shadow a potential observer, every whisper a memory of that night. Survival was temporary. The dead zone never forgets.